Well, so this is now split in two, and I apologize for that, but it is split in two. Uh, it's trying to have me pay for the service, and it shut me off. So hopefully, I will have Carson join me. Here he is here. All right, Carson, great to have you. Sorry about that. All right. So I appreciate your presence here, Carson. Intervene anytime you like with a question or comment.
All
And
right.
yeah, I want to apologize. I'll look into this when I'm done. It did this earlier at my earlier Zoom as well, uh, asking me to timing me out and trying to force me to pay money for further services.
And so told me that
So at any rate,
yeah.
we're down to the first thesis, and it's called salutary neglect, right?
Okay.
We were neglected by Mother England, but it had a healthy or salutary effect on us.
So we declared independence.
So you see here,
Yeah.
most colonial legislators, the elected assemblymen, fought for and often won increased powers in colonial government. For example, Rhode Island and Connecticut assemblies had secured virtual power over the upper house and even governor by 1700. All taxes and decisions concerning how the people's tax money or revenue would be spent had to be passed by the assembly. This body also having control over the governor's salary, which, as you may know, they could and sometimes did use to bully him into compliance. Okay. The governor had no veto power over the assembly, as he too was popularly elected. The Pennsylvania Assembly secured, by way of documents like the Charter of Privileges, light powers by the 1730s. All right. The famous Massachusetts Assembly earned the right to demand approval of councilmen handpicked by the governor by the 1690s. And ultimate power concerning taxing and financial decisions was allegedly won by the end of the 1720s. All right. And then, like I said, we smuggled. We had people form guilds and do what they want as skilled artisans, regardless of what British policy said or didn't say. So economically and politically, we prospered because England was not governing us well, was not governing us with a lot of uh, concentrated jealousy and fear of losing its power. So at any rate, land became available and people defied laws, and the assemblies made laws to give people the opportunity to head west and make something of themselves, even if it was encroaching on Native American territory. All right. So I say here, right? American colonists garnered political rights and economic freedom that they grew accustomed to. They were not fed up with restrictions and tyranny. They merely fought to keep a good thing going. So the whole narrative that we were oppressed, this narrative doesn't buy into that. It's more of an English perspective of us being spoiled brats who fought to keep a good thing going. Then, two, is Bernard Bailyn. The name of his book is something like The Ideological Origins of the Revolution. And that says everything, right? He believes that ideology, that beliefs, philosophy, and political philosophy in particular, form the foundation of our rebellion, and that we fought right for these beliefs and natural rights and government by consent. And the governors are our servants and not our masters, et cetera, et cetera. Right.
Do you think this
So
type of
this is a
sorry.
part of the narrative of American exceptionalism, that we have a special country that was born not on mere lust for power and resources, but for these lofty ideas to be upheld in this special republic that we would devise. All right, this enlightened republic.
Say do you think
So
this
you look
yeah.
at the role of the French and Scottish Enlightenment, the Great Awakening, and you look at the American intelligentsia as these middlemen, right? Or delivery men, as I say, between the writers in Europe and the American public. They summarized what they had read and put the principles in easy language and in fewer words for the American public to absorb. So revolutionary were these claims that man's natural state is freedom, that he's entitled to multiple natural rights, that government is the people's servant, etc., that even those in conservative universities under conservative mentors like Alexander Hamilton read enlightened books by Vattel, Pufendorf, Locke, Montesquieu, Hobbes, Hume voraciously and opposed their own professor and Anglican mentors like Miles Cooper in rebellious fashion. Some it came natural to rebel. Some had a hard time with it, like Thomas Jefferson initially. But the idea is that they collectively began to fully accept these enlightened and other beliefs as axiomatic, as something that you don't even question, that it's just a premise that you could start with, that man was born free, and that he, by way of the social contract, gave consent, his consent for a government to rule and be basically his servant and not his master, right? And protecting his rights and his liberties. So this intelligentsia, men who had time, who could read in the French language itself, these were kind of cream of the crop American intellectuals. You have Thomas Jefferson for sure. His mom was nobility. John Adams was a very well-off bourgeois and commercial farmer, etc., and had a very fine education. John Dickinson, I don't know much about, but he was instrumental in spreading these ideas. And then Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin was very, very good at sarcasm, satire, and also informally outside of Harvard, because he never went to Harvard there in Boston as a young man, just imbibed all these ideas in all these classical books that he could, and he came to firmly believe in them. So at any rate, they're going to put it in a format in which the common people can understand, and they're going to come to embrace these ideas. He says, if you look at the Sons of Liberty and these other relatively uneducated grassroots organizations, they use terms like social contract, natural rights, and specify on those rights to provide evidence that they were enlightened, that they learned about these principles, okay, largely through these intellectual middlemen like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Number 3, I show a more selfish and ambitious side to one single founding father, and that is to George Washington. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, you could almost romantically state that, from his humble origins in the Caribbean, that he largely, he was a winner. He was a, quote, self-made man. He was one of those exceptions who rose up under the British very successfully. And so the fact that he took such an avidly rebellious stance, some people think that we ought to entertain the possibility that he was very sincere in his adherence to these notions of the Enlightenment, because he stood a lot to lose. He was doing great under the British. And so it's not depicted that way with Washington. And that's why I chose Ellis's book on him, is it's more cynical. It suggests that if Washington's ambitions had not been thwarted, had not been stopped, had not fallen short, and had he received what he felt he was entitled to, that he may not have joined the rebellion. So hence there's an element of just, unfulfilled ambition and sour grapes amongst some of the founding fathers, that they couldn't get as highly as they wanted to become under the British and resented the British for that. as opposed to number two, right? Where they're on these, they believe in these general principles for all mankind, et cetera, et cetera. So this is more revisionist history. It's more cynical, shows a selfishly ambitious side to Washington. But note, right, is in not getting the military position that he wanted and it going to Edward Braddock instead, Edward Braddock did not have any introduction, much less training, in guerrilla warfare, right? Guerrilla is little war in Spanish. And so, you strike quickly and ambush when the numbers are on your side, and then you run and hide. You don't fight conventionally. Okay. Washington had been trained and had seen that and had worked with Native Americans in guerrilla warfare tactics. That was just one reason why he felt the job should have been given to him instead of Braddock. But Braddock was better connected to the aristocracy back in England, and hence Braddock got the job instead. And when Braddock attacked Fort Duquesne, Washington said he did it in a very ignorant, rash manner and got himself killed and got the British to lose that battle and failed to take that fort, which Washington, of course, blamed on his superior and made it clear that had he been chosen in that position, it wouldn't have gone that way. You also have the notion of the trading houses, and these trading houses would take Washington's commodities from his commercial farm, and they would decide at what markets and at what price and to whom they would sell them. They would take a cut out of it before they gave the rest of the profits back to Washington. He hated these middlemen. They not only were taken away from his autonomy to make his own decisions with farm products, but they were taken away from his revenue, having to get a cut to them. And of course, he's going to contend that some of their decisions were foolish economically, and he could have yielded a higher profit than they did. And he also is going to contend that it's his natural right to dictate how, and what manner he sell his own merchandise that he has made on his plantation. Notice I use the passive that he has made. He's not out there farming it. He has slaves. He has slave labor. So at any rate, Washington felt like the patronage system, Patronage, the patronage system of having to be patronized by a well-ranking Englishman to do anything, he felt was artificial, unfair, arbitrary. To him, right, the most qualified person should get the job. A commercial farmer should make his own decisions and either succeed or fail in his own endeavors. So you know what I'm saying? The book is a bit mildly revisionist, and that clearly Washington is selfishly ambitious, but that his grievances are not so individually centered, right? But that they're more general, that the most qualified should get the job. That businessmen should be autonomous to make their own business decisions and so forth. And so hence he wanted to live in a land where that was the case instead of favoritism through the aristocratic system of patronage. Then number 4 is the very cynical one by Howard Zinn, as he shows evidence of the poor, of those on the western periphery of the colonies in particular, having a sense of disillusionment with their own elected leaders. But nevertheless, he says those sly foxes, those elected leaders that were largely members of the colonial assemblies, they are going to take control, almost hijack the rebellion so that they could lead it, right? So if they could just kick the British out, they would be the top dogs left standing. So they're led by personal ambition, this class of what we would call founding fathers who led the rebellion, okay? And so in addition to being led by selfish ambition, they would be frightened by the wrath of the poor So they went out of their way to try to make scapegoats of the British because they did not want to incur that wrath themselves, right? Because there is evidence in some written documents that the poor saw their own elected assemblymen and the British as no different whatsoever, that they were haves and the people that had grievances were have-nots, and that it was rich versus poor, not British versus American. So in Zinn's book, right, those ideological forces that were floating around in the mid 1700s, they were conveniently and manipulatively used by the American elite to try to indoctrinate the poor and convince the poor that they would have a special new independent country that included them, that gave them basic human rights, that gave them a say in participating in government, that gave them economic opportunities to pursue wealth and success. So it was a carrot, right, dangled in front of them, this rhetoric, this propaganda. So much more cynical view by Howard Zinn. All right. And of course, you have to admit that some of the wealthy sacrificed a lot of their own wealth and lost a lot of it in this rebellion. So that perhaps needs to be said as well in rebuttal to this last section. The wealthy leaders did not just simply benefit. But nevertheless, when you look at pictures of the founding fathers, right, at the Constitutional Convention, they were not a mini example or microcosm of the population that they represented. If they were such a mini example of the population, there would have been more subsistence farmers, okay? Those who were given just a homestead, enough to subsist on and live independently, were called yeoman farmers. There would have been a lot more of them. And there wouldn't hardly be anybody that was college educated, much less a lawyer. But instead, what you find is a large segment of these gentlemen are lawyers, are college educated, and they saw themselves as the cream of the crop. Rich planters with hundreds or thousands of slaves, big time merchants, etc. So at any rate, that the elite Americans saw themselves as better than the common foot soldiers that fought with and for them. There probably is ample evidence of that. But this takes it a step further than that, right? And contending that they were manipulating the poor for their own enrichment, for their own power, and to save their own bottoms, right? To redirect that wrath of the poor and put it on the British scapegoat. So for something to be revolutionary, I would make the argument that the three categories that we've borrowed from sociology, in all three categories, political with government, economic with allocation of resources, etc., and wealth and land, etc., and the social realm, which is largely culture and belief systems, right? Religion. That in all three of those areas, there should have been a 180-degree turn for something to be truly revolutionary. All right. That's why people sometimes are slow to call our independence a revolution, and some people do so. It seems a little less controversial to call what happened in France in the 1780s and 90s and what happened in Russia around 1917. It seems like there's more consensus in calling both of those a French and a Russian or Bolshevik revolution, because there's good evidence that there were major changes politically, economically, and socially. Here with the US, you have historians like Gordon S. Wood, kind of a court historian, right? Praises the winners, tries to claim that we're an exceptional country. He contends that it was a revolution. Politically, right? We're going to have a written constitution that includes a Bill of Rights of individual natural rights that are not to be taken. We institute a republic like Rome, riddled with checks and balances, right? And we did away with the landed aristocracy. So hence there was a political revolution. Economically, I'm having a hard time remembering his evidence on that realm. But besides the obvious, and that is that we got rid of the mercantilist system and we opened up a free, never laissez-faire, never left alone, like Adam Smith had written about, but a capitalist economy that was relatively open to everybody to compete in. All right. And then socially, he said, we had an end the death of patriarchal deference. Remember, deference is knowing your place and obeying those above you. And he contended that we had a revolution against the entire patriarchal system, the power of dads to dictate who their sons and daughters married, lord power over the younger siblings because he's only given land to the eldest son, known as primogeniture, kind of died and didn't grow here in the American colonies. The sense of being able to rebel and being free to rebel against patriarchal authority, whether it be an Anglican priest, an elected official, an appointed official, or your own father, if you felt like he was not providing and protecting your natural rights and was, guilty of a misrule in one way or another, it justified rebellion. And so hence Gordon S. Woods thinks that there was indeed quite a change in all three of the categories. And so he calls it a revolution. All right. But that's argumentative. And we'll get further into that argument when we do the Constitution. Okay. But were there rebellions? There were the famous two mutinies, at the very least, New Jersey and Pennsylvania, during the war, fought against their own colonial officials, their own officers, making demands about what they were to receive in turn for their fighting services. You had cases of public punishment by George Washington and other leaders to try to invoke fear in their fighters and their militiamen and Continental Congress regulars. And so, there are myriad of ways you could look at that. But to the revisionist historian, the Marxist historian, Howard Zinn, he thinks it's evidence that the common person was no dummy, that he knew his leaders, his rebel leaders, were not in it for him, but in it for themselves. And he knew when he was being used as cannon fodder on the field. And so hence he became apathetic, rebellious. A lot of people didn't return when they were given a short time off to go back and tend to their crops. The rate of return wasn't impressive during some times. Hamilton contends, I would imagine that he would contend, that no, that's not evidence that the poor average fighter in the rebellion didn't think he had anything in it for him, or that it was not in any way for him. but that he simply the common person lacks the grit, the perseverance when the going gets tough. Because let's face it, right? The British kicked our butts on many fronts, especially early in the war. And so, who likes to lose? Who likes to sacrifice when the going gets tough and you're low on provisions and your shoes have worn out and you're fighting barefoot in the snow, right? What average person has the grit to keep going when the going gets tough like that? So that was Hamilton's interpretation to their problems with discipline amongst their own soldiers. All right. And then you also have the fact that maybe some of the average foot soldiers, as Bernard Bailyn contends on number 2, really were enlightened by these ideas of their time. And so hence they were just following them, right? They were against any kind of arbitrary power, people telling them what to do. Their leaders should be elected by them and should be accountable to them and be their servants rather than their masters. That they don't trust anyone with too much authority, humankind, period, right? And so they're libertarian. They want to keep government decentralized and democratic and localized, etc. And they didn't like the idea of this Continental Congress as their new boss and this Continental Army with its feather-capped officers. So you have that component as well. And in the fighting itself, Saratoga was big. A job was given instead of to Henry Clinton. It was given to a young Johnny Burgoyne. And some people believe that it was because Burgoyne was so handsome. And the gentleman, Lord Germain, who gave the position to him, was homosexual. But for whatever reason, if you follow the patronage system, it was not Johnny Burgoyne's turn to receive that position, but he got it anyway, for whatever reason. And Henry Clinton will refuse to help him. And Lord Germain will not give an outright mandate to Howe, Thomas Howe, in Philadelphia to come and help him, but suggests that if it's convenient for him that he do such. And so Howe doesn't do it. So Johnny Burgoyne is left alone, trying to attack Albany, New York, and try to bottle off the New England colonies where they thought was the seedbed of the rebellion. And the Americans were waiting for him at Saratoga. When he surrendered in that October, French King Louis XVI decided that we had a fighting chance to win in this rebellion. So hence he would not be necessarily investing in a losing cause. And he decided to become our military and diplomatic ally against Great Britain. In the end, you have the role of Lacombe de Rochambeau and the Marquis de Lafayette, who both single-handedly gave sound advice to Washington at pivotal points. And the ultimate one, right, was Washington wanted to go back to New York and try to take New York from the Tories and the British. And they talked him in the last minute into joining 2 other armies that were already in Virginia around Yorktown. They talked him into it, and it ended up being a wise decision. They had Cornwallis surrounded, and it was a matter of time before he surrendered. He surrendered, however, largely when he realized his provisions and his bonus troops were not coming from St. Eustatius in the Caribbean. They're supposed to come from that island, and the French Navy blockaded them and kept them stuck on landlocked on the island. At Yorktown, when Cornwallis surrenders, what was left, the lion's share of the British Army, to the rebels, there were 3 French soldiers for every 1 American rebel soldier. So clearly, we largely have the French to thank. All right. And not that we didn't fight well. Uh, they were the number 1 power in the world with their land soldiers. And that was something else to be able to fight until they quit. And other people liken it, right, to Great Britain, to England's Vietnam. They had fistfights in Parliament over this issue. The liberal Whigs called us repeatedly their American cousins, and they did not want to shed bloodshed and continue to send more soldiers here to kill their American cousins. You had India to worry about, which was much more prosperous at that time. The Caribbean, much more commercially prosperous with sugar, etc. at that time. So you had other fish to fry. And so, for various reasons, the English just decided to quit. And so we signed a treaty in 1783, and we try a confederation 4 years at the end of the war. And there's large consensus amongst the leaders of the confederation that it is failing for a myriad of reasons. And they meet in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 and devise a constitution for the republic that we have now. All right. Are there any questions, Carson?
Sorry, hold on. Let's see. Yeah. So, do you know where I can find this document?
All right. I'm assuming not then.
Hold on. Sorry, my
All right.
mic
Well, I
fell.
have you down, Carson. Again, I enjoy your presence
Yeah, thanks,
and I
man.
enjoy your intervention. I don't know. You might be having issues because I don't see the red line as if you have unmuted yourself, but I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Hold on. Hold on.
All right. So yeah, I have you down. You'll get your credit for being here. I thank you for that, Carson. And I hope I was helpful on this next assignment after test 1. All right, so take care, okay? All right, there you are. Hi.